Well, my experience with my father for the first few years of my life were of a kind man and a humorous man who was very engaging in his family. It wasn't until about 7 years old that I started to notice he was much more impatient and quicker to anger. And he also started spending less time with his family and more time at a mosque with the men who would ultimately be responsible for the World Trade Center bombing in 1993.
Was there an attempt to indoctrinate you?
Certainly. As he started spending less time at home, the time that he did spend with me was usually at the mosque, listening to sermons given by the blind Sheikh Omar Abdurrahman, or listening to him discuss religion and politics with the other men involved. I was essentially taught that anyone outside of this very narrow ideology that he followed was a potential danger and a potential threat to me. And so I grew up harboring many negative stereotypes about all kinds of different people.
Could you just tell us a little bit about those stereotypes, or what it was that he was saying to you?
Well, as I said, essentially that anyone outside of the ideology that he followed was there in order to try and make me sin because they were going to hell, and so they were trying to drag me to hell with them. I'd been taught that Jews and Muslims could not coexist with one another, that they were natural enemies, that homosexuality was a sin, and it really took my being exposed to the outside world and interacting with these kinds of people to realize that what I'd been taught as a child was in fact a lie.
Did you meet any of these other jihadists yourself, and especially the mastermind of the 1993 bombing of the World Trade Center?
Yes, I'd met all of them on several occasions. My father would take me out of school early on Fridays so that I could go listen to Sheikh Omar Abdurrahman give his sermon during Friday prayer. I interacted with many of the men involved in the World Trade Center bombing. In fact, one of them, after my father had gone to prison initially for the assassination of Meyer Kahane, one of the men had told him that he wanted to marry my sister when she came of age, as a sign of, I guess, respect and solidarity with my father's actions.
Do you have any relationship now with your father, or are you in contact with him?
You know, for years I visited him in prison, and we talked on the phone constantly. And when I was about 17, I decided to change my name and disconnect communication with my father. The first time I ever gave a speech publicly actually was at Southwestern University in Texas, and when I arrived at my hotel room that evening, there was an email from my father's lawyer saying that my father had been looking for me for many years and would like to be in contact with me. Long story short, he and I began email communication a few years ago because I had questions as to why he chose this action over his family and his family's well-being, and I wanted him to understand how hard it was for our family after he left. But unfortunately, he summed it up with essentially that it was all God's plan, and I'm no longer a Muslim, and he said that if I would just join the religion again, that all of my problems would be solved, which was obviously not something that I wanted to hear. So I decided to discontinue communication with him again.
You also say there were times when you believed what your father was saying was right.
Well, when you're a child, you don't have the ability to determine what's right and what's wrong. You accept what your family teaches you as the truth. And it took many years of conscious effort to rid myself of this almost, I don't want to say natural because it's completely unnatural, but this way of looking at the world and judging everyone around you based on these very constraining precepts. And it really, as I said, once I became exposed to the people that I'd been taught these stereotypes about and found them to be quite different than I had been raised to believe, that I was able to shed many of those beliefs. One of the reasons that I wrote this book was because I wanted to give people insight into what it was like growing up in this ideology, and what experiences and the lessons that I learned from them that brought me out of it. But it was also very important for me, although I'm no longer a Muslim, I wanted to show people that my experience was unique among Muslims, that the vast majority of Muslims in the world are not exposed to this level of extremism. And so if I could come out of it promoting peace and nonviolence and accepting of other people, then what does that say about the vast majority of Muslims in the world?
How difficult was it for you to ultimately reject what your father was saying and break away from it?
There was never any defining moment where I realized that I was not going to follow down this path. It was really an incremental process. Having a conversation with a friend about homosexuals and realizing that my views differed from his, and because I'd experienced bullying very badly as a child, and I was very well aware of what it meant to be victimized for things that were beyond my control, whether it was because of my father's actions or because my name sounded funny. I was born Abdelaziz Sayed Nosair, not Zak Ebrahim, so that's a bit of a mouthful for for a Westerner, and so there were many reasons that I had been bullied for things that I had no control over, and I knew very intimately what that felt like. And so when it came time for me to perpetuate this same sort of treatment on people that I had been taught were bad, I couldn't bring myself to do it, simply because they weren't. They were kind and non-judgmental of me when, certainly there were reasons for them to be.
What do you make of the current situation in Iraq and Syria, and especially the recruitment of many young men and women from the West?
Well, I think it's important that we have a sense of proportion. There are millions of Muslims in the United States. There are tens of millions more Muslims in Europe, and we're talking about a number in the hundreds or very low thousands. That's not to say that it's not a threat, that it's not dangerous, but I think groups like ISIS are not the problem. They are a symptom of the problem. The instability in that region, the dictatorships, the violent governments that often battle these groups and leave very little opportunity for those in the middle who would just like to work and raise their families in safety and provide an education for their families. These are the vast majority of people, and we lose sight of the majority of people when all we're talking about is ISIS and this potential threat.